Hello and welcome to this session of the HX Leaders Summit. We are really pleased to have with us today Martijn Seijsener. And Martijn is an old friend and somebody who has been working on employee experience for a number of years. So one of the rare people in this field who has several years experience doing this and who has done it more than once as a head of EX in an organization. So we're very pleased to have Martijn with us here. Just a little quick background from my perspective on Martijn, and I'll ask him to introduce himself a little bit more in a few minutes. But Martijn comes from the Netherlands. He was, when I met him several years ago, I think this was 4 or 5 years ago, right, Martijn? You were at a tech company called Unit 4, and we're already starting to create the EX function there. Martijn became the head of employee experience for Syngenta, which is the world's largest seeds company out of Basel, Switzerland, a spinoff of Novartis, and quite a large organization there. He helped establish the EX function there, and just recently has become the new head of employee experience for Credit Suisse. So he's based out of Zurich, and in a couple of days, 2 days to be exact, we'll be married in the Netherlands. So congratulations, Martijn.
Thank you.
And we're very pleased to have you here with us today. And tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Credit Suisse. If you could set the stage for us, please.
I'll be more than happy to do that, Elliot. So yeah, great to be here today. And let's go into EX, I would say. But before that, let's go into myself. So just a quick slide that basically shows you a little bit who I am, but although you've given a really great introduction. Yeah, so Dutch, as you already said, within the bank, I have a global responsibility. So I am duly funded by IT and HR, which is one of the reasons why I chose, when the bank approached me, to take the job, basically, because I have a fundamental belief that that's where actually employee experience should sit. It should sit on the crossroads of, in this case, the way that I see it, 3 main drivers of employee experience, which is HR, IT, and, well, within the bank, it's called GBSS, but I call it facilities, right? So basically the real estate and all the amenities that come with that. So really making sure that your workplace for your employees is fitting and is enabling them to do the best work that they can. I'm a design thinker and I'm an agile coach, which means I have also a fundamental belief that when you don't know what the problem is that your people are experiencing or are facing, you can't really create solutions that will solve that. So you first and foremost need to understand what their problems is, and you do that by listening and getting data, but we'll talk about that later. And then from there on, you move forward to seeing, okay, so what are the ideas and how do we start experimenting with those ideas to really understand if these solutions are going to be working. And so employee experience, I think last but not least, just to highlight that, I really see it if you see it like an iceberg, it is basically underneath the customer experience. So if you want to create really great customer experience, of course, you need to first and foremost create really great employee experience. And if you don't do that, then your customer experience will be, let's say, not up to par, and will also affect your bottom line. But if most companies don't have the data to really also show that to the business that is the case.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about, and you have some really, I think, very broad background, and I like the fact that you've become an agile coach and you've got training in design thinking. Why those 2 things?
Yeah, I love that question, because the design thinking is really to make sure that you constantly are questioning your assumptions and your beliefs, and that methodology, either design thinking or service design, for me it's almost the same, helps you really to first and foremost understand that problem that you're trying to solve. And it refrains you from solutioning, right? What I love about it, I heard there was some research that's done actually in New Zealand, which was about, they looked at, okay, so who are solution oriented and who are problem oriented, and they actually found out that if you take 100 people, 66 will have a natural inclination to go to solutioning.
Mm.
And so if you then start applying that to business, you often also see, if you're going into these meetings, that people are already thinking about solutions before they really understand what the problem is.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. So design thinking helps you to stay within that problem space first and foremost, and really understand that. So that was a really important thing for me. Now, when you understand the problem and from the point of view of your users, that's when you start looking at solutioning. And then I think always Agile comes in. So after your ideation and you have basically a bit of an idea of what you think that your users or your employees need, that's when you start developing it in an iterative approach and trying to really get feedback on what you are offering, if that was really addressing the needs that these people are having. So for me, they are really close knitted, and they really help you to show value to your employees and to the business much quicker and get feedback in so that you can make your solution better and better every time.
That's great. Great. Thank you for that background. So it sounds like design thinking, good understanding, also grasp of analytics and data is important. And then you mentioned Agile as a way to, once you define and understand the problem, to really be able to address it and come up with a good prototype way of solutioning. So thank you. Great. Could you tell us a little bit about Credit Suisse and how and why they hired you to be head of EX, and a little bit about your role there? And I understand it's expanding a little bit.
It is, yeah. That's actually quite fresh of the press, I think, if you want to call it like that. But yeah, so Credit Suisse is a bank, I always say, but it's, of course, it's a global wealth manager, right? So we have definitely a investment branch, but we do a lot of other things next to it. Always, you could say, focused on creating wealth for our clients. Mm-hmm. May they be like ultra net clients, so really wealthy individuals, but also entrepreneurs, right? The Credit Suisse really says we are the bank for entrepreneurs, the bank for curious people who and courageous people who see investment opportunities and then also have the courage to basically pursue that. We are a bank which is about, as you can see, a little bit more than 50,000 employees. This is without contractors and contingent workers. If you would add those, you'll probably end up in around 70,000, 75,000. So it's quite a sizable company. We are really also a global representation of the world in terms of our workforce. So we, more than 150 nations work there, and we have a very strong, you could say, Swiss background, because the bank, of course, originated from Switzerland about 160 years ago. And so our headquarters is also within Zurich, which is the reason why I moved to Zurich last August. My role basically, as I already said, subsedes HR. So I have a global role in that sense. And what also, and we will talk about that, what is also very interesting about that is I have also a dotted line to, in this case, our head of business user IT. So everything that in terms of technology that enables our people throughout the bank, which is user facing, that is what he is responsible for. And we work very closely together to make sure that we understand which technology works and which ones not, right? What are the needs? What is frustrating our people versus what is already going well. Now, my role has a little bit expanded because I will also be taking up hybrid working, which is really great, because then also the facilities come in, workplace of the future. And then last but not least, also looking at the governance and leading the teams that will take up either agile projects to you could say find solutions or to improve things, but also the employee journey management teams, basically. So how do we reinvent a journey, and how do we make sure we do that in an agile way, but also with taking in basic design thinking and service design.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit about how does Credit Suisse and how do you define and view experiences, and why does this matter?
Yeah, no, definitely. I always say leveling the playing field, because one of the things that I love about design thinking and service design, that it's all about alignment, right? So a journey map or a persona or any of these employee experience assets, for me, the reason for them, the main reason is that they are a visualization of data that creates alignment by having these different parties, so that we have a same kind of understanding and we have the same language once we talk, which shows also empathy, because the data shows that you understand what people are facing or experiencing. But before we do that, let's talk about experience. So for me, I will first want to go to the human experience, because then we can go to the experience of work, right? So if you take a look at what is experience and how do we define this, is that you have a human, and this human has needs or goals. I always make it even more simpler. I always say somebody tries to achieve a task or tries to solve a problem, right? And that means, and around that, you also have these needs, which means, the freedom, a sense of autonomy, belonging, those kinds of things. You can see them basically in terms of the core needs being outlined on the slide. But then within that, achieving a task or solving a problem and having those needs also, then you basically have this complex environment of human, physical, and digital interactions.
Fantastic.
Yes, and so that either creates an experience where you have needs that are being met, that are being enabled, or they are not being met, right? And that creates friction. So the human experience, if you take a look at it, and it's not a human experience is individual, holistic, and situational. So it's a moment in time and space which a human goes through, which encompasses a lot. It encompasses your sights, sounds, your feelings, your thoughts, and then basically your motives and actions, which are all closely knitted together and then are stored in memory. I think it's the lady from IBM that said at one point, the great experience you have will become the minimum of experience you will expect the next time. And this is definitely what happens here, right? And if you do that well as a company, you then also are making sure you're creating ambassadors, because we always talk about that. But that is the reason why people become ambassadors, because in a context when they talk to others, they can relive that as soon as they're talking about that experience, and then they start communicating about that. So if you take that definition, then this for us, and I think a lot of us are similar in how we view this, but the human experience of work is this sum of interactions, right, that a human has with the organization, and in the context that influences those interactions over the duration of the relationship. So it encompasses, but it also, I would say, transcends the employee lifecycle that sometimes people are talking about, right? It is within this employee experience ecosystem that it happens, right? And I think that's a really important one. So we can go to the employee experience system in a couple of slides, but I really want to view it like that, because that allows us to start zooming in and zooming out.
Yeah, I really like that definition too, because as you say, it's much more than just the employee life cycle, and it's much more than HR, right? Because we don't join a company for good HR, and we don't leave because HR is broken. It's all the other factors. So I like this idea that it's a more holistic view of everything. And also the fact that it's how we perceive it and how we remember it, because it's the lasting impressions, right? So yes. Tell us more about that. I'm anxious to hear, or happy to hear more about this holistic approach.
Yes. So basically, if you take a look at it, and of course, I think many of us have also read Jacob Morgan, but I think this really helps us to start understanding it in a more holistic way. So basically, you have three spaces within the employee experience ecosystem, right? The first one is the human one, which is really about the interactions that an employee has with, or a human has, with all the other human factors around around their work experience. So that means, you know, can be the peer, the manager, because it's about, I think about 60%, research is showing 60% of the employee experience is being either created or frustrated by the manager. It's a conduit of the employee experience, and we sometimes also forget that, but that's a really important one. And but of course also your team, your peers, and other adjacent teams. And if you want to zoom it in on the HR employee life cycle, it already also starts, of course, with the hiring manager, the recruiter, those kinds of things. And are they able to create a congruent experience? Because the law of congruent experience is really important here. Doesn't mean that it has to be constantly consistent, but it needs to be congruent. So what is being created at the start, like when we talk about the EVP, are we able throughout these interactions to strengthen that experience, to make sure that the candidate feels like, oh, this is actually, okay, yeah, so I am, this experience is reliable. I'm seeing what's happening here and it's being strengthened. Like my feelings that I'm having around this experience are being either, how will you say that, are either, yeah, I'm looking for the right word. Well, I'll get to it in a second.
Yeah.
So that's the first space. The other one is the things, and it means basically what we touch as employees, right? So physical and digital. Here you have everybody's talking about, you know, the workplace of the future. So these are these touch points, which basically means it can be technology, it can be also the office equipment, as you can see in the slide, but it can also be the chatbots and the learning platforms. What you often now hear is, can we not create one space, an employee hub for people to go and interact with, right? And here you go, you have your chatbots, your learning platforms coming together, because actually the employee doesn't really care if it's IT, HR, facilities, or any of the other departments who are solving their issue. They just want their issue to be solved, and they want to have it solved in a clear way, easy way, and also want to feel like they have, you could say, autonomy on how to solve that. And that is often lacking, of course, because people get into different clunky systems and they speak also different languages. You often what I sometimes say is, we expect our employees to start speaking IT, HR, or facilities language or jargon, whereas we shouldn't. We should write something in a way that a 12-year-old can understand it, because it means that everybody understands it. And then last but not least, but it's an important one, is our external factors, right? So there are outside of your control as a company, but they are really important, right? So how do you have conversations with your family and your friends around the company that you work for, and what that experience is? You know, how's your brand being perceived, and how do you make sure that also creates a congruent experience? So all these different spaces, they interact and intersect anytime, basically. So every time an employee or a human interacts, they can actually interact with both a touch point together through a human, and then also having sometimes external factors, right? The example that I sometimes give is, you're trying to solve, as an employee, you're trying to solve a problem by having a Zoom call with your manager, and that issue is within the CRM. And therefore, you're also trying to connect with the chatbot all at the same time. And how do you then solve that issue together with these three interactions? And how do you create an experience that delights as opposed to frustrates?
Yeah. I really like this visualization too, because it reminds me of a diagram that's early on in the This is Service Design Doing book. I think has a kind of the layers, almost like presenting a present. You know, you have the wrapping on the outside, and you have several layers in the organization, including external and things, and culture and things like that. But what I appreciate the most is that the closer you get to the center, to us as human beings, it's the human element that has the highest impact. It's not the tools or the processes or the systems that we spend so much time on. It's that human interaction that makes or breaks. That's why we join or leave a company.
Exactly.
And I like what you said about how even though you have all of these different people, like in a recruiting or hiring process, you have many different people who are part of that, but it's that whole experience that you form, that impression that is through the people that makes or breaks the experience for us. So great, thanks for sharing. So tell us a little bit about, so how and where do you get insights for all of this? How does Martijn start to make all of this work?
So when I joined the bank, I asked them, where's the data? Because as you can imagine, this is quite a very complex ecosystem. So in an employee experience design or service design, or which are basically the moments that matter, or the touch points that are underperforming, that are having a disproportionate effect on the full employee journey. And that's what you first and foremost need to know. Does it fit within HR? Does it fit within IT or in GBSS, or does it fit within both? So you first and foremost need data. And I'm not talking about engagement data. Let me go to the next slide for that. So what I'm talking about is you want to have data that shows you what the quality of interactions is that an employee has whenever they basically interact with the company, right? That's the first and foremost. Commitment data shows you, engagement data shows you the commitment that employees have towards a company, or the way that they resonate with the values or the leadership of a company. It doesn't show you the quality of interaction. So it's a different kind of data set that you're looking for. And I strongly urge always people to stop using engagement data and presenting it as experience data, because I sometimes see that. Because you are basically screwing the data, and you're trying to present it in a way that it isn't. So you need to first and foremost start gathering that, right? So you need to set up the right EX approach, measurement approach, and then also determine the right listening channels. And those can be a couple of those. What I always say is you need to have at least 3, because you need to be able to triangulate the data.
Yeah.
You can't have one data set and then basically say with any confidence, okay, so the insights that we've gotten from this data, we can say that they are robust, because they're not. You need to really make sure you have 3 at least. And that can be a survey, often one of the usual suspects. It can be a focus group, and it can be, for example, interviews. And if you have these 3, encompassing also a full representation of your target group, then you are at a good place, I would say.
Yeah. Do you have an example of how that's worked for you in practice, where you've applied that triangulation approach that's really given you some interesting results, maybe something that surprised you?
Yeah. So basically, I'll give you an example within the bank. One of the projects that I was asked to head, it was onboarding new line managers. So people that have become a new line manager either within the bank or joined the bank from outside within a line manager function, which you already understand from an assumption point of view, they might have different needs, because people who are joining from outside of the bank already often have experience, whereas the ones who are becoming a line manager in the bank is the first time for them. So what we did, or they actually already did, which was really great, is they went out, had different focus groups, and also had a survey under about 2,000 line managers, and also did some in-depth interviews. So we already had these 3 data sets, and those 3 data sets we then started converting into the data, into the insights, converting them to personas to understand how it is from these different points. And what was really interesting is we came up with 2 personas first and foremost. But as we were triangulating and we were working, we actually found out that there was a third one. But that only happened after we went with the two personas and we presented them to the sounding board, because we had a sounding board installed, which was a representation of line managers from different businesses, so that we would have feedback from, in this case, the user group. We had to go back to the data set as a team and look again. And that's when basically the third one, you could say, popped up by triangulating once more and looking at the data with a different view. And so, so definitely that triangulation helped us to then find the third persona and then move from there further, you could say.
Yeah, you wouldn't have had that without that 3-point approach.
No,
that's fantastic. So tell us a little bit about how this works here with your listening strategy, and how have you helped leaders in Credit Suisse to use this? Do you do any kind of training or preparation of people to be able to help them understand how to read and use data?
Yeah. So what we often do is we first do inception, just taking, again, a little bit of an agile term, but we do inception session where we introduce people with, okay, what is employee experience design? What's design thinking? Why are we doing that? And why are our EX assets just a starting point? And, I always get feeble if I see it hanging up a wall and nobody's scribbling on it or changing it, right? Because that means they haven't been validating it with their other stakeholders. It needs to change. If it's there only for 2 weeks and nothing happens with those personas or journey maps, you are just seeing it as output, which is not the case. It's a starting point. It's just a visualization. So that's what we do. We start with inception, with like an introduction session, and then we take them, you could say, along the journey. Let me just use that, where we infuse bit by bit more of the thinking. We introduce the personas or the moments that matter, or those kinds of EX assets, whilst bringing constantly back what we're doing. And I think that's really important, because that's the only way to make sure that they start understanding what the methodology is, why we are bringing it out, and then often also why we are validating it with them, because that's the only way to go. Of course, because you need to also constantly keep yourself honest as teams to make sure that your bias is not creeping in, because you're building empathy throughout these employee experience assets, but you're also bringing in your own biases. So making sure that you validate that with others is a really important thing.
Fantastic. And tell us a little bit about quick wins and how you decide on those, and what are a couple of examples for you of quick wins?
So the quick wins for me, because there's two things, right? So if you convert your insights into these assets, then and you have basically your insights, you'll have two of these things. You have two categories. One will be, where is the reinvention or redesign needed of the journey, but also what are the quick wins, and so what can be optimized or can be fixed within the own remit. So IT or HR. And so one of the quick wins I just quickly I can mention was, we had a group of neurodiverse people, and they wanted to have noise canceling headphones, right? But they had to go through quite a lengthy process to get that with different approvals. So a quick win was to review the approval process, make it easier, get corporate comms in, making sure that the communication on the site was going to be changed so that they could find in an easier way and basically order these things within 3 steps. That's a quick win, which made it life easier for them, and also us as a bank. We were enabling them to get these headphones, and for them to have an easier, you could say, work environment. And be more successful in their job.
Yeah, that's great. So this is a really great overview of your kind of your data strategy, your listening strategy combined with EX. And you've got, I think one of the things here, it's interesting too, you use key insights, jobs to be done, user stories, things like that. Can you give us some examples now about where in data do you focus? Where does this lead you? What are some examples there you can share?
Yeah, so we are currently, we're actually on the journey of implementing a new human management capital system. And so what we focus there first and foremost is to understand what is the current state, right? So the current state and what are then first and foremost the overarching insights, and then what are the moments that matter for our people within that. And then from the moments that matter, we then started looking at, okay, if we know that, now what kind of, what are the personas also really important. So we developed in this case 7 personas. Now this is something that all our work streams are using. So our functional work streams and our technical work streams are using personas whenever they take a decision.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a quick example. Year-end review kind of process, performance review process. So how is it for managing Mandy, who's the line manager?
Yeah.
When we take this decision. But if we take this decision, what would that then mean for, in this case, the supporting CETA, which is the HR champion? The reporting kind of requirements. What are their needs? What are their frustrations? Okay, so how can we create a decision that takes all these needs into consideration, neutralizes the biggest frustrations for these people, and also creates an experience that is much better than it is currently. So that's what they're using in the decision making. And then we also have then started mapping out the current journey to understand, okay, which are then the touch points we need to change or neutralize or optimize. And last but not least, I think is really important, is then we broke that down into user stories to again make sure that the teams were being honest to themselves, and every time they took a decision or looked at, okay, so how do we create a process, that that the user was in the middle, that the employee was in the middle, and that their needs were constantly there. And that's the only way to create employee centricity. So and making it also manageable for them. So user stories with acceptance criteria again helped us really, and the functional stream teams, to really look at, okay, so yeah, we've created this process, but what is actually that managing Mandy needs? Oh, it's this and this. Now let's have a look at the acceptance criteria. Okay, well, I think we need to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for taking us through that. So tell us now about how you think about experience data and the kind of, I think what you call the multifaceted complexity.
Yeah. So it already says on this slide, and then I'll go to the other slide. But the complexity actually goes into 3 elements. One is, you need to start understanding the touch points that are performing or not performing. You need to understand what are these moments that matter. A great example was that when I was at one of the other companies, we thought that the year-end review was a moment that mattered for people, from an HR point of view, right? And it actually wasn't. It was a hygiene factor. It needed to be right, it needed to be clear, it needed to be congruent with what they expected, the employees, but it wasn't the moment that mattered. What the moment that mattered was, and there was actually 2, was their work anniversary, and it was also their birthday. That created reflection moments, and how you as a company treated that, and also created again this affirmation of a sense of belonging. That created an experience that delighted, not the year-end review.
Yeah, I like that. Great.
So the moment that matters is the one that you need to understand the experience attributes. So how are people experiencing it? Is it delightful? Is it intuitive? Is it frustrating? What is that experience for them? Is it emotionally charged? Could be also that. And then also the touch points. Because what I really love, again, with an example, is that as soon as you start taking employee experience design in, you start understanding that employees don't see things like in a sequence, nor do they see it in a touch point that's performing. They see it as a journey. So you can have 2 or 3 touch points performing really, really well, but you only have to have one that's performing really, really bad. That basically brings down the whole journey. And the employee will be like, okay, this is bad. This experience is really, really bad. Yeah. Exactly. That's what they will remember. And we just spoke before we started on airports. McKinsey has this really great research, which is about why do airports are being perceived or rated as really bad. About, I think it was 4 of the 10 complaints are about security.
Yeah.
And about how do you go through security, you know, how do they handle you, but also how do they treat you? And as soon as that is really bad, that basically creates an emotional charge, and that means that the whole airport is bad.
Yeah,
not the security.
That's what stays with you. And the interesting thing about that too is that impacts your view of the experience with the airline or the travel company that you're going with. So it has nothing to do with, it's totally out of their control, but it impacts their experience. It goes back to what you were saying earlier about people don't care who's going to take care of their problem. They just want it done.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's good. It's a good lesson for those of us in HR who are listening and thinking about this, that we have to have other people on the product team with us. So great.
Yes. So this is exactly what we just discussed, right? So this is already said which interactions are most important or most painful to employees. And in the context of that employee experience ecosystem, which ones are creating the most friction, and how to then you know how to neutralize that, and then also how are they perceived, and that helps you on one hand to inform your priorities, and on the other hand, you know, also trigger action, because there's too many companies that and also within, I think with us within the bank, that have a lot of EX projects, but the question is, are they really moving the needle? And you need to have data to show you that. And so that helps you to trigger actions. It helps you to course correct if it's needed. And it also helps you to start focusing.
Yeah, fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about how you zoom in on moments that matter and think about those. I think you have something to share with us there about these specific assets.
Yes, I do. Yeah, well, we already started talking about the human capital management project, and that's why I wanted to just quickly also zoom in on this, because this for us is really important, because as you can imagine, this is a human capital implementation of a human capital management system is a very complex and a very, you could say also politically charged project, because there are so many stakeholders that are involved. So that's why we said, okay, one of the design principles in this project is that employee experience is paramount. Okay, when we say that, that means we also need to, of course, show that that's the case. So let's make sure that the employee is at the center of everything that we do. So what we first and foremost did, as I said, is we went out to people, and the way that we did that is we had a partner, of course, helping us with that. And I remember the first conversation I had with them. I said, okay, so what did you do in terms of data gathering? And I said, well, we talked to 20 senior stakeholders. I said, that's great. That's a start, but that's not going to be our only data set, because it's only 10% of our company, and they often have a different kind of service and kind of service experience, and getting a different kind of experience than you could say the majority of the company. So let's make sure we start branching out and taking in everybody. So what we did is we did it in a virtual way, because we wanted to really create a space where we spoke to the whole, you could say, the global workforce. So we created focus groups, but we also connected it to, you could say, a polling technology enabler. So that allowed us to ask certain questions and create a safe space for people to be candid about how they experience things. And then within those focus groups, which just 1 hour, we would then ask people to elaborate on certain of these things. And if they wanted, they did. And if they didn't, then it was also fine. Wow. It just really helped us to really get the data that we were looking for, and also understanding from their point of view how they were seeing, in this case, HR products and services, or a combination of both. We did 15 of those. we had, I think, 3,500 unique kind of qualitative data, together with the operational data that we already had here. You go again into the triangulation, and some of the other data sets we had, we then started triangulating, and that helped us to start looking at, okay, so what are these key themes and insights, as you can imagine, and then also boiling it down into what are these moments that matter for the bank, for Credit Suisse, but not for Credit Suisse, for our employees, of course.
Fantastic.
And these criteria really made sure that people understood, okay, so what are moments that matter? Because often you hear people talking about moments that matter, but we might talk about different things. So again, creating alignment on that and making sure that people understand that we are talking about these criteria when we talk about moments that matter.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that example. What are some of you've talked about EX assets and some of these things. How do you see those as they relate to this now, and how do you apply these in Credit Suisse? Where are they used?
Yeah, so they're used throughout, in this case, the whole HCM project, and also what's important with that is how are they connected, and to make sure that that's clear. So this is one of the slides that we also are using really deliberately to make sure that, okay, guys, these things are all interconnected. They are all vehicles to basically, on one hand, zoom in and zoom out, as we already talked about, and on the other hand, also convey empathy, because that's what you're doing. You're listening to people, understanding their point of view, and then understanding what they need and how to address that, because you understand what they're experiencing. So the personas are really about, so to keep the teams and to keep ourselves honest on who are we designing for. If we start talking about managing Mandy or starting Sakash or joining Jabir, we're talking about people. We're not talking about a concept. So every time we are taking decisions on processes or on use of technology or those kinds of things, we are thinking about, okay, so who is being affected by that, and how are we addressing the needs of these in this case 7 personas, and also how to combine them, because sometimes we can create something really great for one, as I already mentioned at the beginning, for managing Mandy, for example, but if for supporting CETA that creates a really bad experience, we're still not really successful in making sure that employee centricity is there. Right. Then basically, if you understand who you're designing for, as you can imagine, then, okay, so you're designing in which, in this case, stage of the life cycle, and then zooming in on, in that stage, what are then these moments that matter, right? So which identified moments have a disproportionate effect on the employee experience? If you have that, then you start mapping out the current journey. So you start understanding, okay, so if we have, for example, I apply, then let's map that out. Again, data visualization of, okay, so for that moment, how is that journey and which are the steps? Again, point of view of the employee are important. You know, what happens, which touch points are interacting here, which ones are creating biggest frustration. And as soon as we had that, then we made sure that we also started having the user story. So breaking down basically the understanding of the issues, and then creating in non-technical language the key requirements that are needed, in this case, for the functional and the technical streams to deliver the target experience, so the to be. Yeah,
this really helps you to map it out in a concrete way and be able to start operationalizing all this. So maybe could you take us now into how you use the data and how you operationalize and actually apply all of this?
Yes, definitely would love to do that. So what's really important, I think, is I don't see employee experience becoming a new COE or SME, right? I see employee experience much more as a service provider. And so if you start taking that kind of view, it means that you also have a different operating model. So as you can see here on the slide, you need to, on one hand, you have the data. Okay, so the data helps you to focus and to prioritize. That's good. So it creates this transparency. So as a service to the business and to other adjacent departments like IT and GBSS, you
Yeah.
provide transparency to set the right priorities, both within the overarching, but also zooming in on their different departments. Then also, when it's needed, you will provide capability to redesign journeys, and to also make sure that teams can work cross-functional, and that they have the knowledge, but also the ways of working to take things into a employee-centric way. So to use design thinking, to use service design, and to also at one point use agile to deliver basically these kinds of journeys. And last but not least, also what's really important is to show what the impact is when you redesign a journey on the bottom line. Just basically showing the business, okay, we've designed this, we've changed it now, we've put in the metrics in place.
Yeah.
So now we can control basically the journey, having journey management, and we can now start also showing you what that means for your bottom line.
Great. Thank you for this. I'm sure we could have you back just a whole session on how you operationalize and build capabilities. As a last bit of maybe parting advice, what are some lessons learned? And maybe if you could include in that, leading out from this slide, what advice would you give to people who are starting to build a function or who have started to build it but wonder what's next? Where do you get these capabilities, and how do you pull them into this service organization that you've described?
Yeah, I love that question. So first of all, my first advice would be, and that's not on the slide, but that's basically going out there. So not trying to do it yourself, but go out to the marketing department. Go and have a question with them. Start looking at, for example, the customer journey or customer experience teams. What are they doing if you have them within your company? Because they already have a lot of knowledge. Make sure that corporate comms becomes your biggest ally, because they help you. You don't necessarily have the skills or the ability or the talent to really create great messaging and communication, and you need that. So really start going out there and start understanding from different departments, different parts within your company, how they're doing things, how they see employee centricity, and start pulling them in. That's the first thing I would say in terms of advice. Then if you take a look at this, quickly highlighting a couple of them, but first and foremost, stop thinking in a linear way about the employee experience. Start looking at it from a holistic point of view, because that's the only way to stage really great employee experience. I already said it, stop relying on engagement data for basically creating experiences. And then also start positioning already from the start that the employee experience is not a COE or an SME, but a service provider within the organization.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important one. And then the last but not least, of course, prioritize EX improvements by business impact and all these other things, but you need to build your current state baseline. Because if you don't have that, you won't be able to focus. And you won't have the opportunity to have conversations on the basis of data with other departments who might also think that their EX project is really great.
Fantastic. And yeah, this is great advice. And the thing that I love about this, that I think a lot of us are struggling with, is how do you build this? Because I think if we take the traditional approach of the COE or building internal capability, that's really hard. We're not familiar with these roles. I've been talking with a lot of organizations where they don't even know how to create a job description for this. It's already in your organization, so you don't have to create something from the start or think that you have to own it. But to be successful immediately, you go out and borrow it somewhere else in the organization. That's really great advice. Well, thank you so much, Martijn. I really appreciate your time with us today. I think this is a really good roadmap for how to think about employee experience or the human experience of work, and also how to construct it. What are some of the main elements with design thinking, service design, agile, and especially the data that you've talked about, and then how to operationalize all of this and sharing these examples. So thanks again for sharing this. And best wishes with your wedding and with all the other things that you have going on at this time. And just want to thank you for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Elliot. It was really great to be here.